Lawmakers will take a break from 12:30 to 2:15 Eastern for their weekly party lunches. And when they come back, they'll hold a cloture vote on whether to continue work on the bill. If it fails to get the needed 60 votes, senators will likely move on to a bill dealing with farm subsidies, nutrition, and conservation programs. And live coverage now of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Almighty God, as our lawmakers seek to meet their responsibilities, give them the awareness to look not only to the immediate concerns of the moment, but to be enlightened by your providential wisdom and your eternal Spirit. Strengthened by your Spirit, give them the wisdom to refuse to do anything which would bring regret, remorse, or shame. May they never do anything they would have to hide and about which they should be ashamed that others should know. Lord, today we confess our human inadequacies and our need for you to infuse us with your strength. May this be a day in which we all sense your presence and receive your power. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., June 5, 2012. To the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Richard Blumenthal, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 410S3220.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 410 as 3220, a bill to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
We're now on the motion to proceed to the Paycheck Fairness Act. Following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, time until 12:30 will be equally divided. The majority will control the first 30 minutes, and the Republicans will control the second 30 minutes. The Senate will recess from 12:30, and I ask, Mr. President, the unanimous consent that the cloture vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed as 3220 occur at 2:30 rather than 2:15, with the time from 2:15 until 2:30 to be equally divided between the two leaders, with the majority controlling the final half.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, we're on as I indicated, the Paycheck Fairness Act, and we'll have that cloture vote at 2:30 today. Most Americans believe if they get an education, they work hard and play by the rules, they'll have a fair shot at success. But for millions of American women, no amount of talent or dedication will bring pay equality with their male co-workers. In the minds of many employers, they simply aren't equal. Women take home 77 cents for every dollar their male colleagues earn for doing exactly the same work. That stunning fact holds true regardless of whether a woman has a college degree, regardless of how many hours she spends in the office each week, or on some manufacturing floor. Regardless of what job she holds, 77 cents applies. But, Mr. President, listen to this. If she's an African-American woman or a Hispanic woman, the disparity is even starker. African American women make 62 cents on the dollar, and Hispanic women 54 cents on the dollar, compared to white men working the same hours and doing the same jobs. Not different jobs, the exact same jobs. If you're Hispanic and you're a woman, you get about half as much as the man doing the same job. If you're African American, you get about 60 cents compared to every dollar that that man makes. And while landmark pieces of legislation like the Equal Pay Act and the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act have narrowed the pay gap, they haven't closed the gap, and that's obvious by these numbers that I just announced to the Senate. So Congress must do more. This act before the Senate would give workers stronger tools to combat wage discrimination. Now, Mr. President, one of the tools of retaliation that employers have is they fire workers if they discuss how much they make with another worker. Our legislation would bar retaliation against workers for discussing salary information. Why do we have this in the bill? Well, the landmark legislation we had to pass it because the Supreme Court ruled against Lilly Ledbetter. Lilly Ledbetter is a woman who worked in Alabama for many, many years. And she didn't know that she was being paid far less than her male counterparts who did the same work. And so when she learned this, she filed a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court said, sorry, Lilly, you didn't file it in time. The statute of limitations has run, meaning that you have to file within a certain period of time. Well, we have many different places in the law where you do not start tolling the statute until you learn something's wrong. For example, we had to go back on medical malpractice cases where people were treated negligently by physicians, but the poor patient didn't realize this till long after, usually, for example, in the state of Nevada, it's a 2-year statute had run. So we changed that almost every place in the country. And we need to make sure that people understand, in this instance, now that we've passed the Lilly Ledbetter legislation, that you don't have, the time doesn't start running until you learn that you're being cheated. So our legislation would bar retaliation against workers for discussing salary information, and it would help secure adequate compensation for victims of gender-based pay discrimination. Take the state of Nevada. Over their lifetimes, Nevada women will earn about $475,000 less than their male counterparts, about $500,000. But this isn't just an issue for women. It's a family issue. Why? Because every year, millions of American families are cheated out of money they could spend on groceries, rent, and gas. Every year, wage discrimination puts almost 400,000 Nevada children at risk. For many families in Nevada and across the country, a woman is the only income generator in that family. For many more women, that person is the primary breadwinner. Yet, Republicans have vowed to block this legislation. It's in all the news today. Every headline news talks about this bill coming up today. And the Republicans saying they're going to vote against it because it creates too much bookwork. They've vowed to block legislation that would even the playing field and help women provide for their families, even though Americans overwhelmingly support this legislation. 9 out of 10 Americans, including 81% of men, 70% of Republicans, support pay equity legislation. Once again, the only Republicans who are against our common sense measure are the ones that are in Congress in Washington. Even Mitt Romney has refused to publicly oppose this legislation. He may oppose it, but he's afraid to say anything about it. Why? Because it's obvious why. He should show some leadership, my opinion, Governor Romney, and tell his fellow Republicans that opposing fair pay for all Americans is shameful. Instead, no one knows where he stands. But we know where Democrats stand. Everyone knows. We stand firmly on the side of equality for every working woman. Democrats stand with middle-class women working to keep their families afloat during these difficult times. We stand with young women pursuing a college education, hoping to get a good-paying job when they graduate. We stand with little girls whose mothers have taught them there's no limit to their dreams. And this evening, Americans will see where Republicans stand on this issue. It's unfortunate they'll once again favor obstruction over equality.
President.
The Republican leader.
Mr. President, I'd like to continue to discuss the student loan issue this morning because the administration's approach to this problem is really nothing short of surreal. I have in my hand a letter. It's been signed by the top 4 Republicans in Congress, Speaker Boehner, Leader Cantor, Minority Whip John Kyle, and myself. It lists no fewer than 4 good faith bipartisan proposals to resolve the issue, all of which are based on offsets the President has proposed himself in the past. So let me say that again. We have recommended to the President 4 offsets that he himself has proposed in the past to achieve what we all want to achieve, which is a 1-year extension of the current student loan interest rates. We sent this letter to the President 5 days ago. Yet we now learn, in spite of the fact that they have a proposal recommending that we on a bipartisan basis accept offsets that they have previously recommended, we now learn the Vice President plans to have a group of college presidents over to the White House today to, quote, reassert the call for Congress to stop the student loan interest rate from doubling. Congress is active. We've given the administration 4 offsets that they previously have proposed. We're waiting for a response so we can solve this problem. Why doesn't the Vice President just simply pick up the phone, choose one of the proposals we laid out in our letter, and then announce at the meeting that the problem's been resolved? That way he'll give these folks some good news to bring back to their campuses, instead of just asking them to be props in this elaborate farce the White House political team cooked up on this issue. An elaborate farce. This can be solved very easily with offsets that the administration itself has recommended. So the only people dragging their feet on this issue are over at the White House itself. Republicans in Congress have been crystal clear for weeks. We're ready to resolve the issue, to give students the certainty they need about their loan payments. The President may find it politically useful to keep these young people off balance, but we don't think they should have to wait another day on this. And it's inexcusable for the President to allow this impasse to persist. That's why we've been over backwards to find a solution. And it's simply disingenuous for the President to claim otherwise, which brings me to a larger point. We all realize the President's concerned about his reelection. I understand he's placing a higher priority on fundraising and on trying to make Republicans look bad as he ramps up in November. I get his rationale for running a negative campaign. If I were him, I wouldn't want to brag about my record either. I get it. But I would remind him that he is still president, even though the campaign is going on, that Americans are looking for leadership, and that the economic problems we face will only get worse if he avoids them for 6 more months. So whether it's the student loan issue or the prospect of a massive tax hike at the end of the year, Republicans are ready to work with the President to provide the kind of certainty that the American people need right now. But it's a two-way street. And we'll never solve these problems if the President continues to mislead the American people about what Republicans in Congress are willing and eager to do to help. Now, Mr. President, on another matter, hearings on the Environmental Protection Agency's regulatory agenda will be held in Kentucky this week. One hearing will be held today in Frankfort and another later this week in Pikeville. Since Congress is in session this week, I won't be able to attend these important hearings in person, but I will have a representative on hand at each hearing, and I want to express my thoughts on the matter today on the Senate floor. Like most of the country, Kentucky is suffering from very very difficult economic times. Far too many Kentuckians are unemployed, and the prospect for future employment remains daunting. That's why it is especially irritating that this administration has blindly followed ideological policies that eliminate jobs in our communities. The people of Kentucky are amongst the hardest working people on the planet. But how can we be expected to compete if our own government is actually working against us? Simply put, my constituents are under siege from the Obama administration's regulatory agenda, and the EPA is the worst offender, the very worst. Perhaps the clearest example of this administration's regulatory assault is its war on coal. Since being sworn in, President Obama's EPA has set out to circumvent the will of Congress and the American people by turning the already cumbersome mine permitting process into a backdoor means of shutting down coal mines. 18,000 Kentuckians work in coal mining, and nearly 200,000 more, including farmers, realtors, and transportation workers, rely on the coal industry for their jobs. Coal brings in more than $3.5 billion from out of state and pays more than $1 billion in direct wages every year. Attacking an industry so important to Kentucky will only succeed in putting people out of work, impeding future job growth, and increasing energy prices. A former senior EPA official under the Obama administration recently summed up the regulatory philosophy of the agency with respect to those working in the coal business by saying it wants to, quote, crucify them. Let me say that again. This was a regulator with respect to those working in the coal business saying it wants to, quote, crucify them, end quote. With this radical environmental anti-coal agenda, it is no wonder the administration has failed to answer the American people's call for greater domestic energy production. The real-world impact of their fantasy world energy policy is that people are losing their jobs and energy prices will rise even further. It is high time the Obama administration stop treating the Kentucky coal industry as the problem and start recognizing that it has been and will continue to be part of the solution. Mr. President, before I yield the floor, I'd like to ask consent that the letter that I referred to in my first statement be included at the end of that statement for the record.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 12:30 p.m. will be equally divided and controlled by the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the second 30 minutes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to urge my colleagues to affirmatively and unabashedly vote for cloture on the Paycheck Fairness Act that we wish to bring before the United States Senate. Mr. President, this is part of a very long march that the women of the United States of America have been walking for a very long time. In 1963, President Lyndon Johnson wanted to create a great society, and he envisioned 3 civil rights acts to right the wrongs of the past. One was equal pay, the Equal Pay Act, which would ensure that women would get equal pay for equal work. The second was the Benchmark Civil Rights Act, and the third was the Voting Rights Act. Lyndon Johnson picked the Equal Pay Act as his first action because he felt it would be one of the easier ones to pass and to implement. Little did he know that the corporate wrath that was going to be against women in the past would come to that legislation. But a democratically controlled Senate moved that bill and began the long march for civil rights. But guess what happened in the ensuing 49 years? On June 10th, President Johnson signed that bill in 1963. 49 years later, women still make less than men. Women in the United States of America make only 77 cents for what men doing the same job make. This is unfair and it's un-American. And remember where we have come. Everybody likes to say to us, oh, you've come a long way. Well, we don't think we've come a long way. We've only gained 18 cents in 49 years. In 1963, we made 59 cents for every dollar that men make. Now it's 77 cents. So what does that mean? It means every 5 years we make an advancement of 1 penny. Oh, no, no more. We're just not going to take it anymore. When I go out and talk to my constituents, they say to me, they're mad as hell. They don't want to take it anymore. If they go to school, they get the job, they do the job, they want to be paid for the job, and we agree with them. And we don't only want to do it with words, we want to do it with deeds, and we want to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act that would ensure to do this. Women fight every day for fair pay, for equal pay. And when they do, they're sidelined, redlined, or even pink slipped. Right now in the marketplace, it is legal to fire a woman if she asks about her pay, whether she goes to the personnel director or she asks the person next to her at the water cooler. Often women are harassed and intimidated for just being asked to say, what do you make for the work you do? So we're ready to fight for women to get equal pay, and the best way to do it is to do it right here on the Senate floor. People then say to me, well, hey, Senator Barb, you led the fight on Lilly Ledbetter. Didn't that solve all the problems? It solved a big problem. We made a down payment to keep the courthouse door open for women who are discriminated against, but it did not close the loopholes that were in the original Civil Rights Act. What Lilly Ledbetter did was change the statute of limitations to file a lawsuit from the date of each discriminatory paycheck. Now we need to pass paycheck fairness to close the loopholes that allow discrimination to happen in the very first place. What does this bill do? It's actually very simple. If you listen to the right-wing pundits, you would think that this was complicated, that it was going to rend asunder the American economy, and so on. This is fundamental fairness. First of all, what does it do? Number one, no longer will employers be able to retaliate against workers for sharing information about wages. Remember what I said earlier. If you ask someone what you get paid, you can get fired. For years, Lilly Ledbetter and those she represents were humiliated and harassed for just asking questions. No longer will women be able to seek only back pay. When they are discriminated against, they will also be able to seek punitive damages. No longer will employers be able to use almost any reason to justify paying a woman less. Oh, the guys do harder jobs. Oh, the jobs do dangerous jobs. Oh, they have a better education. We're talking about equal pay for equal work that requires the same education. No longer will women be on their own because we're going to be able to include various education and training. As I said, in 1963, we made 59 cents. Women now make 77 cents. That's not progress. The consequences to this are severe. What does this mean? Well, let's take the college graduate, the woman who's had the benefit and privilege of an education. It starts the minute she tosses her hat in the air, that when she goes for that job, say in information technology or even in some of the innovation economy fields, she will be making less. At the rate they're going, when by the time she retires, there'll be a $434,000 income pay gap. Now, this is serious because it not only affects your income as you go through your life, but it affects your Social Security, it affects your pension, it affects absolutely, absolutely everything. The negative impact multiplies. It's like compound interest in reverse. It's compound disinterest. It's compounded unfairness. So these are real grievances. That's why the Paycheck Fairness would be able to do this. Now, when we look at the life of being a woman, it also, we women know that being a woman often means that we pay more. We certainly pay more for health insurance than men with the same coverage for the exact same age or health status. What does that mean? It means that we estimate that women pay thousands of dollars more in medical insurance over their lifetime. We're often on the hook for child care, and there are a variety of things that we could elaborate on. I believe that people should be judged in the workplace for skills and competence. And once you get the job and you show you can do the job, be paid to do that job. For my colleagues who argue that 20 cents per hour doesn't matter, let me give you some numbers. That means $4,000 less per year for a working family, $434,000 a year over a lifetime. This means we get paid 23% less than a man doing the same work who has the same education. Now, you know what, Mr. President? You're a smart guy. You know that when we go to get a mortgage, we don't get a 23% discount. When we go to buy food, we don't get a 23% discount. When we go to pay our utility bills, they don't say, oh, you're paid less, we're going to give you a discount. No, we get charged the same and often more for what we do, but we're paid less. Well, we're not going to accept being paid less. We're paying attention to this problem, and we've listened to the voices of the people. You know, this isn't just Senator Barb sounding off on her women's rights agenda. My women's rights agenda is about the economic empowerment of women, that they have a chance in this great country to be able to move ahead. And when I listen from a constituent in Silver Spring with years of teaching experience, even in public employment, she was paid less. Then we listened to a trauma surgeon who emailed me from Florida, highly educated. She filed suit because she found out her male surgeon doing the exact same surgery was paid $25,000 more than she was. Another woman emailed me from Virginia. She claimed she was told by her supervisor that hiring a woman would be simply a liability. You're going to get pregnant, you're going to miss work, we don't know if we want you here. That's a whole other issue. And then she said, and we don't need to pay you that, you don't head up a household, so why should you get the money for some guy who does head up a household? You know what, we face old prejudices, but we're in a new economy, and we're in a new world. More and more women are in the workplace, and when we come, we want to be treated with respect, and we want to have equal pay for equal work. Mr. President, I note that my colleague, Senator Murray, is here. I yield her 5 minutes.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, I want to start off by giving a true and heartfelt thank you to Senator MIKULSKI. There is no denying she is such a strong and steadfast leader on this issue, and we all so appreciate it. So I'm very proud to come to the Senate floor this morning with her and many others to strongly support the Paycheck Fairness Act and to urge Republicans to join with us to pass this critical bill. You know, over the past few months, many of us have stood together to fight back against partisan attacks on policies that impact women across America. Mr. President, we have not started these fights, but we were not going to stand by and watch as others tried to roll back the clock. But every time we stood up to defend women, our friends on the other side of the aisle would jump right up and say we were creating, quote, distractions or manufactured issues. They said we should be focused on the economy, as if we were the ones changing the subject and making the partisan attacks. Well, Mr. President, we are not going to stop standing up for women and families. And to those of our colleagues who claim to be so concerned about the economy and the middle class, now's your chance to prove to your constituents that you really mean what you say. Because the Paycheck Fairness Act is not just about women. And it is not just about fairness. It is about the economy. When women are not paid what they deserve, middle-class families and our communities pay the price. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act marked one of the first steps towards narrowing the gap between men and women. And in 2009, the Senate took another step by passing the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act to reverse the Supreme Court's Ledbetter versus Goodyear case, which had made it almost impossible for our workers who suffered from discrimination to seek justice. And although we have made progress since we passed the Equal Pay Act almost 50 years ago, pay discrimination has not gone away. Women in my home state of Washington still earn 77 cents on the dollar. That is a pay gap that averages 11,834 lost earnings in each and every year. That's an extra 90 weeks of groceries or 179 tanks of gasoline. To women in Washington and to most women across America, that's certainly not a manufactured issue. It is very real. And, Mr. President, this comes at a time when more and more families rely on women's wages to put food on the table or stay in their homes or build a nest egg for their retirement or help pay for their children's education. The importance of women in the workplace has never been as critical as today, and this has become even more evident in this tough economy. Mr. President, the fact is that women are now participating in the workforce at higher rates than ever before in history, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So it would seem most appropriate for this Senate to move our country once again towards eliminating pay discrimination and unfairness in the workplace. The Paycheck Fairness Act that we are going to have a vote on today tackles pay discrimination head-on, and it shouldn't be a partisan issue or only a women's issue. It's good for women, it's good for families, and it levels the playing field for businesses in America who are doing the right thing and paying their workers fairly. Mr. President, the Paycheck Fairness Act is good for business too. It recognizes employers for excellence in their pay practices, and it strengthens the federal outreach and assistance to all businesses to help them improve equal pay practices. It is time to address this issue and finally close the wage gap for our working women and their families. You know, I was very proud to stand with Senator MIKULSKI and other members of Congress and the President as he signed the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009 to give women who are victims of pay discrimination the tools they need to seek justice. But our work is far from complete. We are still not yet at the point where our daughters can expect to earn the same amount over their lifetime as our sons. That has to change. And now we need to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act as quickly as possible to keep our nation moving in the right direction. Again, I want to thank Senator MIKULSKI for her tremendous leadership and steadfastness on this and her hard work to make this a reality for every working woman in this country. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President, there will be other Democratic senators speaking during this time, and I want to thank Senator Murray because she's been a real champion on this. She's been a champion on making sure that women are treated with respect in this workplace and in the United States military. She has been a particular champion for ensuring that women in the military and women in the VA system get treated with fairness. We've got a long way to go. I mean, this is 2012, and you think at times it was 1812. But, you know, in 1812, we in Baltimore fought another revolution, and we'll fight in 2012. So we thank her for her advocacy and look forward to having her vote this afternoon. Mr. President, this isn't only a woman's issue where the women's rights groups are pounding the table. We have the support and endorsement of the American Bar Association. I have here a letter which I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record, in which the ABA absolutely endorses this legislation. The ABA, which we know is a prestigious, distinguished representation of the American Bar, says that when we passed the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act, it was landmark. But quoting again from their letter, in the 50 years since its passage, has become out of date and ineffective wage discrimination remains a persistent, widespread, and pernicious problem. In commenting on this bill, the ABA says the Paycheck Fairness would update the key provisions of the Equal Pay Act without altering the basic scheme of the historic statute or imposing excessive novel burdens on employers. Remember what this isn't Senator MIKULSKI again. This is ABA saying it will not impose excessive or novel burdens on employers. And indeed, most of the proposed changes are borrowed from other civil rights statutes that prove more effective in eradicating workplace discrimination. This goes to what the ABA says. But now, Mr. President, I'd like to yield 6 minutes to the distinguished gentlelady from New Hampshire, a governor, a senator, a real advocate who has had to not only be a leader in passing of legislation, but in implementing it, and we welcome her insights and her advocacy.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm so pleased to be able to join our colleague and leader on so many issues that affect women and families, Senator MIKULSKI. I am here today to join her and our other colleagues who will be coming to the floor to talk about something that's a real matter of fundamental importance for our country. Workers should have equal access to every opportunity that will help them put food on the table, send their children to school, and save for retirement. Unfortunately, here we are in 2012, and still millions of American women lose nearly a quarter of their potential earnings to pay discrimination. Almost 50 years after the landmark Equal Pay Act banned wage discrimination based on gender, women in our country continue to be paid just over 3/4 of what their male counterparts receive for performing the exact same work. Every day that this wage gap exists is a further injustice to current workers, like my daughters, and to future members of the workforce, like my granddaughters and so many other granddaughters of members of this body. Pay discrimination doesn't just hurt employees. It endangers the families that depend on these women. 1 in 3 working moms is her family's only source of income. With the money that mother loses to pay discrimination every year, she could be paying housing and utility costs in her home, or she could be feeding her family with money to spare. You know, back in the early 80s, I chaired a task force for New Hampshire's Commission on the Status of Women, looking at women in employment. And what we found was discrimination in a whole range of areas, including, of course, pay discrimination. But the conclusion of that report was that that kind of discrimination against women doesn't just hurt women who are affected. It hurts their families, their children, their husbands, and it has a ripple effect throughout our economy. As governor, I signed a law to prohibit gender-based pay discrimination in New Hampshire and to require equal pay for equal work. In the year before that law was signed, women in New Hampshire made 69% of their male colleagues' wages. Today, they make 78%. When President Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act into law in 1963, women made less than 60 cents for each dollar earned by men. Today, we make 77 cents. So we made some progress, but clearly we still have a long way to go and a lot of work to do. I recently heard from a woman named Marie in New Boston, New Hampshire, about her experience with pay discrimination. And she wrote, "I worked for many years in a male-dominated company where the fresh-out-of-college boys were paid substantially more than I was for the same position." She continued to recount that she actually trained these same men to do their jobs, and yet she still wasn't paid at the same rate. Since the Equal Pay Act was enacted in 1963, the gender gap impacting wages has only narrowed by an average of ½ cent per year. So at this rate, it's going to take another 45 years for that gap to close entirely. The Paycheck Fairness Act would make common-sense updates to this law by requiring pay differences to be based on legitimate business reasons. It would also protect women whose employers try to shirk their responsibilities by prohibiting employees from discussing their salaries. And finally, this important legislation would create a program to strengthen women and girls' negotiation skills so that they can seek the pay they deserve directly. It is long past time for us to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. I urge all of our colleagues to support this legislation. It is bipartisan, it is good for women and their families, and it is good for the country. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
I thank the gentlelady from New Hampshire. And now I would like to yield the floor for 7 minutes to our colleague from California, Senator Boxer, who she and I served in the House, we served in the Senate, and we've been fighting this for a long time. And I think you'll find her words welcome and insightful. Her passion and her devotion to women is legendary. I yield 7 minutes to Senator Boxer.
Thank you so much, Senator Mikulski, not only for yielding to me, but for your extraordinary leadership here in the United States Senate on so many issues of fairness and justice for women, for families, for children, for our seniors. It's really a legendary record that you have amassed, and this is just one more example. I also want to thank President Obama for his leadership in calling attention to this important legislation, the Paycheck Fairness Act. If you were to stop someone on the street and in the simplest terms say, do you think it's right to pay people different for the same job? Do you think that's right? They have the same experience, same education, same qualifications. People say, no, that's not right. But yet that is what has been happening to America's women, even though we have, since the 60s, a very important law in place that's supposed to guarantee fair pay to everyone, including women. But women earn 77 cents for every dollar earned by a man, and when you drill down to those numbers, you find out in a vast number of cases, they're doing the same work as a man, making less. And of course, Lilly Ledbetter made a very important point about this and became quite famous with a Supreme Court case where she'd been doing the same thing as her male counterparts, working in a tire factory, being a manager, being skilled, being strong, and yet underpaid. And when she discovered it, trying to seek justice, was unable to do so. And the Senate stepped up to the plate, and with the Democrats moving forward, we passed the Lilly Ledbetter law, which does take care of the statute of limitations. It allows you to take as long as you have to get to court to make your case. With Lilly, it was too late, and she never was able to recover what she deserved. So now what Senator Mikulski has done, the Paycheck Fairness Act, is to say we're going to go the next step. We're going to make sure that women have justice in the workplace, that women have rights. And why is this important to families? Not just to women, but to families. It is because over a lifetime of discrimination that so many women face, it's not like here where you're a senator, you're a senator, you're a senator, woman, man. Out there, it's different. And when you're discriminated against over a lifetime and are only getting 77 cents, and some, by the way, only making 56 cents or 62 cents on the dollar, the average wage loss over a working lifetime is over $400,000. Now, if you take a look at what our families could do with $400,000, educate a child, make sure that people get the best of medical care. Make sure the family has enough so they can all take a break together and have a decent vacation or buy a better car. This is an issue, Mr. President, that not only involves women, but our families and our economy. Because guess what? If that $400,000 during a lifetime was with the family, rather than the corporate CEO who's making millions, you would see the economy stimulated because middle-class families spend those dollars. They don't hoard those dollars. So I'm going to close this by giving you a couple of real-life examples. How much time do I have remaining?
2.5 minutes.
So I'm going to tell you some real stories. A woman from California had an identical advanced degree as her husband, and they both landed exact jobs, but in different parts of the company, different work sites. The husband was offered $5,000 more in starting salary, and they were shocked. The same resume, the same qualifications. Then there was the healthcare worker in Long Island who discovered she'd been earning $10 an hour less than her male colleagues. When she brought it up to her superiors, she was reprimanded for even asking about the rationale behind the wage gap. Senator Mikulski's bill says you can't be reprimanded or punished because you're trying to find out if you're being paid fairly. That's why we have to pass this law, and anyone voting against it is taking a stand against women, is taking a stand against fairness, is taking a stand against justice, is taking a stand against our families. Then there was a female employee for a major corporation in Florida who was told when she was hired that to disclose your salary to other workers was grounds for dismissal. Since then, she realized her male counterparts made more than she did, but she didn't have any written proof. Another, a female employee at that company, was told because her husband picked her up from work in a nice car that she didn't need to get a salary increase. One woman retired after 15 years as an award-winning CEO of a public agency. Her male replacement, who had little experience, was hired at a higher salary. After having a child, a California woman was fired from her job at a nonprofit. Her replacement, a man with less experience, was given 30% more in starting salary. Mr. President, we have example after example after example. How the Republican side of the aisle could filibuster this bill is beyond my imagination. I don't know what they're thinking. They'll give an excuse. They'll come up with some excuse. They'll say, oh, it'll hurt jobs, it'll hurt this and that. It's all made up. It's all made up. In this great nation, when we move toward equality, we all prosper together. So I thank you for this time so much. I urge an aye vote. I thank Senator Mikulski for this moment to be able to support this important bill, and I yield the floor.
The time for the majority has expired.
Mr. President, may I ask the parliamentary situation?
There are now 30 minutes under the control of the Republicans.
I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President, I withdraw my request.
The request is withdrawn.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Given that it's election year, the American people are going to hear a lot of highly charged political rhetoric over the next few months. They are likely already tired of what they have heard. The Arkansans I talked with during the last week while traveling the state certainly have told me that much. They don't want to see the finger pointing. They want us to fix the problems that we face. They're tired of the back and forth. They're tired of us seeking credit and placing blame. They see an economy in shambles and nobody willing to take responsibility. To put it bluntly, they're frustrated. I think we all hear that message when we go home. I think we can all agree that more can and needs to be done. The jobs report that came out last Friday certainly reinforces that. When the President pushed through his massive stimulus package in 2009, he claimed unemployment would be below 6% today. With a national unemployment rate of 8.2%, we're not even close to 6%, much less below it. And to make matters worse, we are moving further away from the mark. This is the 40th straight month where the unemployment rate has remained above 8%. 12.7 million Americans are unemployed. Millions more are underemployed. The economic picture is especially troubling for young Americans looking to enter the workforce. America has the lowest employment-to-population ratio for young adults since 1948. Millions of Americans who are looking for work can't find it. This is unprecedented, it's unacceptable, and it's unsustainable. The President met the report with a call for another round of stimulus spending. Look, we've tried that. It didn't work. More of the same will not work either. More government spending will not solve this problem, and paying for that spending by raising taxes on small business, the people that we are counting on to turn our economy around, is certainly counterintuitive. When the people you are counting on to spur the recovery tell you that the country is going in the wrong direction, then we should listen. In almost every poll, small business owners have responded that the uncertainty coming out of Washington is what is preventing them from hiring. Quite simply, they fear what the next wave of regulation is going to be and the proposed taxes, what that will do to their ability to grow their business. Small business owners are afraid to invest any capital because they don't know what their taxes will be, afraid to hire another employee because they are nervous about what that does to their health care cost, and afraid to expand until they know how big their energy bill is going to be. Washington has to change course. My colleagues and I have a better path to a healthy economy that restores economic security and opportunity. Our market-based reforms are focused on creating a healthier environment for businesses to hire and to expand. We want to cut through regulations instead of adding more. We want to fix the tax code to incentivize hiring instead of passing the tab for more wasteful spending on the small business. We want to reduce their costs by encouraging producing domestic sources of energy instead of driving costs up by continuing our reliance on other countries for our needs. 3 years of trying to tax and spend our way out of this problem has not worked. The American people are rightfully frustrated. All we're saying is, we tried the President's way and it hasn't worked. Let's try our market-based approach. But here is where we run into the old election year problem. Ever since the numbers were released, all the media has been talking about is what the report means in terms of the presidential election. This, in turn, has Washington digging in deeper to its respective trenches. That angle of the story misses the most important part. This is about more than numbers, more than a report, more than a political talking point. It's real people, all of whom are looking to Washington for help. It's past time we started fighting for them instead of for our political futures. With that, Mr. President, I note the absence of a quorum. I'm sorry, I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of equal pay for equal work. The importance of women in the workplace is clear to every American. We all have women in the families who have been proud part of the workforce. For 2 decades, my mother worked hard in a school cafeteria. My wife, a substitute teacher, has long been part of Nevada's workforce. And my oldest daughter, in this economy, was fortunate enough to get a job after graduating from college just a few years ago. And my youngest daughter, 16, recently got a summer job at a local feedlot. 60% of my Senate staff are female. America is a land of opportunity, and Americans are equally united against discrimination in any form. If my mother, my wife, or my daughters experience workplace discrimination based on their gender, I would be the first to come to their defense and ensure any inequities were addressed. Congress passed the Equal Pay Act in 1963 to ensure every individual received equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender. It is a strict liability statute that requires evidence of intent to discriminate. If there is evidence of intentional discrimination, appropriate remedies, including punitive and compensatory damages, are available under the Civil Rights Act. Let me be clear. Pay discrimination based upon gender is unacceptable. Despite the political rhetoric around here, everyone agrees on this fact. The question is, will Paycheck Fairness Act actually address workplace inequality? And the simple answer is no. Unfortunately, the only winners under this legislation would be trial lawyers, giving them a windfall, exposing employers to unemployed punitive damages. This legislation opens the door to frivolous lawsuits, which already cost our economy billions of dollars every year. Legitimate cases that could be addressed under the current system would be lost in a flood of lawsuits initiated by lawyers beyond a few, hoping to win a few large judgments. These lawsuits, if successful, could transfer billions of dollars from employers to trial lawyers. In an economy already marked by uncertainty, this legislation would surely mean lost jobs, limitations on benefits, and pay cuts. These changes would mean much harder times ahead for Nevadans unemployed and underemployed, so many of whom are women. Instead of a trial lawyer bailout, let's address the issue of equal pay. Instead of holding votes designed for press releases, let's actually work to solve our nation's problems. Congress can strengthen the Equal Pay Act without handing trial lawyers a blank check. Wall Street Journal today referred to this legislation as a trial lawyer doozy just in time for the 2012 election ads, and goes on to say, the bill ought to be called the Trial Lawyers Paycheck Act, since it's a recipe for class action booms. The law automatically lists women as plaintiffs in class actions when lawyers sue employers, thereby requiring female employees to opt out of litigation with which they don't agree. Businesses would be treated as guilty until they're shown to be innocent. You cannot be pro-jobs and anti-business. This is just another example of Democrats' war on free enterprise, while Americans suffer with joblessness and underemployment. In fact, under this president, there are 766,000 more women unemployed today than when he took office. I truly wish today's discussion was about leveling the playing field, truly ensuring pay equality and improving the economy. But years-old legislation, mired in politics, won't get us any closer to either ending gender discrimination in the workplace or ensuring that all women who want to have a job. This proposal couldn't pass when Democrats controlled both chambers of Congress. Yet here we are today voting on the same measure again and again, and those who are actually victims of workplace discrimination are only getting lip service from Washington. Like many of my colleagues, I worry about this proposal that will only increase litigation and do little to actually address the problems of pay inequality. Advancements in pay parity have been made, but more needs to be done. Congress would better serve the hardworking women of our nation if we focused on solutions that have actually worked. To this end, I have introduced the End Pay Discrimination Through Information Act. This legislation would protect employees who are trying to determine whether or not they are experiencing pay discrimination. No one in this body should be so naive to say that pay discrimination has been eradicated. What we need to do is ensure that employees can find the information they need to determine whether or not they have a legitimate claim against their employer. The In-Pay Discrimination through Information Act provides anti-retaliation and whistleblower protection that both sides should be able to agree upon. My legislation is a solution within the existing framework of our legal system that does not provide a handout to trial lawyers as the underlying bill would do. My bill also recognizes the role of women in America's workforce and the fact that an increasing number of U.S. households depend on the income of working women. My legislation states, quote, that equal pay for equal work is a principle and practice that should be observed by all employers, unquote. Every day, working women are going above and beyond, balancing their responsibilities at home and work to provide for their families. The least we can do is ensure that employers that intentionally discriminate on the basis of sex should be held accountable for their wrongdoing. I believe my bill is a reasonable bipartisan step in the right direction. Instead of bringing up legislation that has failed in the past and will in the future, this Congress needs to give our nation the economic certainty needed to create good-paying jobs so hardworking women across this country will be able to provide for their families and achieve the career successes that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.